Hello everyone, and welcome back to another Mirror Dungeon solo video. In today's episode, we'll be using the first ever canonical streamer, Cinq Meursault. Let's be honest, out of every sinner in the game, how many of us expected Meursault to be the first streamer? Not me, that's for sure. Anyway, the identity itself is a pretty unique Poise Rupture hybrid. Sure, he's not the first identity to have both of those statuses, but he is the first to actually be able to support them both equally. First, his poise generation is pretty good. Both his skill 1 and 2 have positive poise count generation, so it's unlikely for him to accidentally destroy his own poise stack. His skill 3 is his main source of poise potency, giving him upwards of 10 if he both wins a clash and the enemy has his unique status effect of focus attack, which we'll talk about in a moment. The main thing that separates him from other poise identities though is that his main crit payoff is directly tied to the amount of rupture on the enemy he's critting. This means that he really wants to be used in an actual rupture team to get his maximum value out of his crits. Otherwise, it will only give him the regular 20% damage boost that everyone else gets. Speaking of rupture, on his own, his application is pretty bad. He only has 4 rupture potency on his skill 1 and 2, and his only source of count is on his skill 2, which, with it only being 2 count, he cannot keep a stack alive on his own. Now at face value this may seem like a problem, but then you realize every one of his skills has this line which reads as follows. On use, if the target has 15 plus rupture and 3 plus rupture count, this skill does not inflict rupture with its effects, but does not consume rupture count on hit. This essentially means that he cannot contribute to building the rupture stack in any meaningful way, but at the same time he never really actually will kill the stack so long as this minimum requirement is met. Now I mentioned this briefly when I did my Deviat Rodion video, as she too has the same effect, but I didn't really go into that much detail about it there. So allow me to do that here instead. This one singular line is more than enough to ensure Cinq Association Meursault is one of the single best rupture identities from now until the end of time. That may seem like a bit of an exaggeration, after all power creep does exist, but believe me when I say he will always be good. Literally the only thing that matters for any rupture identity is how much rupture count they inflict, or rather I should say how much they consume. The best identities are ones that have either positive or neutral count application, and for Meursault, every single one of his skills have the potential to be neutral. Now you might be thinking 15 rupture and 3 count seems like a pretty tall order for an identity who is count negative before the conditional is active. And you would be correct in your way of thinking if not for the single small insignificant detail of this guy existing. Talisman Sinclair is the single best rupture identity in the game. Full stop, period. What does he do? Well, put simply, he applies Talisman. What does Talisman do? Anytime a character that has it takes a hit, it will automatically apply rupture potency equal to the Talisman stack. This one simple status effect is capable of supplying every single bit of rupture potency we could ever possibly need. The only other thing required is enough count to not accidentally kill the stack. The one and only downside to Rupture is that the only source of Talisman is on Talisman Sinclair, and frankly he kind of sucks. His only application is on his skill 3, and he needs a minimum of 2 turns to actually set it up. Because it's tied to his skill 3, it also means he can only apply it every 6 turns or so, and as such makes Rupture virtually unusable in anything that is in a single phase, single target boss fight. The second there's a second enemy or a second phase that automatically cleanses debuffs, Talisman becomes completely worthless, and Rupture is delegated to only doing an occasional 3 damage sometimes. The only way Project Moon can truly make Rupture viable in different forms of content is to give us some other form of Talisman infliction, whether it be a new identity or Talisman Doll ego. But Project Moon clearly knows how powerful Talisman is and is being relatively cautious with giving us more, otherwise we probably would have a Talisman ego by now. Anyway, returning back to Meursault, the last thing to mention is his focus attack mechanic. This incentivizes him to continually attack the same skill slot over and over again to gain more power and damage. It forces him into playing in a fairly unique way when soloing, ignoring every single attack except one and dodging everything else. For certain bosses that have set attack patterns, you kind of need to memorize what skills are used in which skill slot in order to clash with really dangerous attacks. Most bosses don't actually have something like this, but there are a few. To start the run off, we take Fluorescent Lamp and Barbed Snare for our starting gifts and choose the Forgotten for the first floor. We also find Lithograph here and can beat G-Corp with relative ease. The only real difficulty being Meursault's gluttony weakness, but otherwise it's not that difficult. We take standard duty battery for our reward and head into Falling Flowers for the next floor. Here we buy Greycoat, Pendant of Nostalgia, Nebulizer, and Painkillers, while also finding Broken Revolver, and find ourselves facing the face of Rupture himself, Talisman Doll, for the boss. He's really not that difficult to solo unless you're Blunt Fatal. Cinq Meursault is though, but that doesn't really matter because evades exist. Even if we didn't have an evade, we'd probably be fine thanks to Painkillers. Normally you'd play into the doll's gimmick. Soloing means you always have max Talisman by the time you can apply it on him and easily make his big attack useless. Despite that though, I don't actually play into his gimmick at all and choose to completely ignore it in favor of stacking up Meursault's focus attack. This works incredibly well as we end up staggering the doll's arm the turn he was going to use his big attack, and thus we don't have to deal with it at all.
먼저 끝내고 돌아오는 친구는 맛있는 거 사줄게.
승객이 딱콩 한 방 먹였어. 적들이 흔들려. 쨍그랑 도희가 조각냈어. 계속해도 돼.
개체는
다음에 다른 개체에게도 다시 해봐줄래?
We take Talisman Bundle for our reward and head into Dregs of the Manor for the next floor. Here I decide to fight the Brazen Bow in an encounter for absolutely no reason. None of his ego gifts benefit us at all, but I didn't feel like dealing with his skill check's negative effects, no matter how minimal they might be. This fight was certainly challenging. With us being blunt weak and the bull capable of outrolling our evades, it essentially boiled down to just getting lucky and having the bull roll tails a few times. With the bull's reduced health due to it being an event fight, and us having a gloom skill, it doesn't take much time for us to be on our way.
완벽한 한방. 시원한걸?
We find Cigarette Holder before finally arriving at the boss against Hindley, though Hindley himself is not the main threat here. It is, and always will be, the dead rabbits. In fact, with virtually every fight on this floor being against the rabbits, it was a real struggle to even get this far. The main problem comes from our blunt weakness and their rupture infliction. If it was just one of those, it would be manageable, but with both, it resulted in an almost guaranteed stagger at the end of every first turn. Our ability to make it through this fight came down to essentially three major factors outside of just pure luck. First, Painkillers just being absolutely goated. Second, Greycoat and Lithograph giving us much needed healing. And finally, the ability for Meursault to reuse his skill 3 when he defeats an enemy with its final coin.
먼저 가버릴 거야.
With the dead rabbits being fatal to gloom damage, it is more than enough to take them from full health down to 0 with only a single use. Most of the time, the on-kill effects are not very good, but occasionally when you're up against the perfect enemy with the perfect skill, it will happen every single time you use it. As for the boss itself, Hindley's a joke. The only actually challenging part was the first wave.
엄청난 공격이었어. 기념할 만한걸?
늦으면 내 기록 먼저 갈 거야.
나이스! 하나 잡혔다.
얘기도 다시 해봐줄래? 영상만 남기면
완벽한 한방 시원한걸?
그 공격에 적합하진 않아 보이네. 관리법을 적어도
We take the ragged umbrellas for our reward and head into a certain world for the next floor. Here we buy Oracle, Late Bloomer's Tattoo, and Phantom Pain while also fusing clear mirror calm water before heading in to face Nelly. Nelly is much easier of a boss. Now that we have clear mirror calm water, our damage output is frankly ridiculous. Plus, even if we didn't have that, a simple evade is more than enough to trivialize her entire mechanic. You can't gain bonus clash power if you're not clashing after all.
좋아, 얼른 끝내고
적들이 흔들흔들 생각이 꼭 필요한 건 뭐겠어.
We take the Chief Butler's secret arts for our reward and receive Death Seeker as a bonus. For the final floor, we head into Murder on the Warp Express where we fuse Thunder Branch and headed in to defeat Cassetti. This fight was never going to be a challenge. Evade plus Clear Mirror Calm Water is more than enough to trivialize any boss fight.
그 과정에서 희생이 나올 수 있겠지만 내가 세키라로서 너희가 죽지 않도록 도와줄게. 하루 기다리는 거 못해. 직원들이 개체를 제압하는데 조금씩 나아가고 있네요. 대성공이야. 가방 신나. 노래 부를까? 조금만 더 힘내자. 느끼가 배고파했어.
오, 머리 좋다 단테. 방금 완전 좋았어.
개체의 약점을 정확히 꿰뚫었습니다. 승부 준비를 철저히 해놨습니다.
적합한 관리법이었어. 칼날이 잘 드네요. 안 아플 거고. 방금 공격. 다음에 다른 개체에게도 다시 해봐줄래?
압도했습니다. 제 기존 검술보다 한층 더 향상된 기술을 쓸 수 있었다고 생각합니다. 시청자의 수가 대폭 증가하겠고
And that's how I soloed Mirror Dungeon 4 hard using only Cinq Meursault. A very good poise identity on his own and one of the best Rupture ones when actually in the team. Project Moon just needs to give us more talismans so Rupture can shine outside of boss fights and I'll be happy. Anyway, that's it from me. Like and subscribe to not miss next time where we'll be using this character. Goodbye.